Unacademy has been looking for a merger or a complete buyout.
Unacademy has laid off close to 250 employees across their marketing, sales and product functions. Remember, this is not the first time that we're seeing layoffs from Academy in the recent past. Just last year, they had laid off around 10% of their workforce to cut costs and to move towards profitability.
Along with Byju's, it was one of the first Edtech companies to become a unicorn in India.
India has a new unicorn. It is the Edtech startup Unacademy.
But it seems like that was the highest point of Unacademy's story. It last raised $440 million in August 2021 at a $3.44 billion valuation. But it has been unable to raise funds since then. And then there was the spectacular crash of Byju's last year. After investors lost billions of dollars in Byju's, it is unlikely for any edtech startup to get funded anytime soon. So Unacademy has been struggling to survive. In April 2022, it laid off nearly 1,000 employees. Then in March 2023, it laid off another 380 people. And this month, another 250 employees lost their jobs. So from 6,000 employees in early 2022, its workforce has been slashed by 60% in just 2 years to nearly 2,000 employees. Its co-founder and CTO Himesh Singh has also moved on, which is never a good sign. And in a desperate attempt to survive, Unacademy also dished their original idea of being an online education platform. They started opening offline centers across cities like Kota and Delhi. The Morning Context reported that Unacademy's founder Gaurav Munjal is on a deadline by the company's board. He has 6 months left to turn the business around. If he can't do it by the end of this year, the board will take a more central role in the operations. He might be replaced. So Unacademy has reportedly approached Alan, Physicswala and K12 Techno for a merger or acquisition. And it is even ready to negotiate and accept a lower valuation. That is how desperate it is. After seeing the Byju's debacle, no investor wants to take chances. But things were not always like this for Unacademy. After Byju's, they were the second edtech company in India to cross $1 billion in valuation. And unlike Byju's, Unacademy hasn't taken any rash decisions either, like hiring expensive ambassadors or going crazy on acquisitions. Gaurav Munjal has always taken a much more calculated and composed approach. In fact, Munjal says that Unacademy still has 1,600 crores in the bank. That is enough for the company to survive for the next 5 years. So if the finances seem to be fine, why are investors pushing for a sale or merger of Unacademy? Why did Unacademy decide to go into the offline coaching space at all, despite being an online edtech startup? Will Unacademy survive, or is it going to follow in the footsteps of Byju's? To find the answers, let's start by understanding how Unacademy got to the place where it is today. Gaurav Munjal initially started with a small YouTube channel in 2010. He uploaded tutorials on YouTube while he was still in college and pursuing engineering. A few years later in 2015, he roped in his friends Himesh Singh and Roman Saini, who was an IAS officer back then, to start an academy for UPSC aspirants. And Unacademy found immediate success. The platform offered a seamless online learning experience to students, as Roman's own experience of cracking the UPSC exam came in handy. Unacademy brought experienced educators who had themselves cracked the exam in most cases. And you could access content on demand whenever and wherever you wanted. And most importantly, it was free. And this was also the time when edtech was on the cusp of being unleashed. By 2016, the Indian private coaching industry was already estimated to be around $40 billion. This was also a time when cheap smartphones from China had started flooding Indian markets. And Jio suddenly gave almost every Indian household free internet access. So a significant chunk of this growing coaching industry was poised to go online in the form of the education technology or edtech sector. And Unacademy was one of the first movers in the edtech space. While other popular educators were still only on YouTube, Unacademy was successfully creating its own platform and ecosystem. By 2017, it had over 1 million learners and 5,000 plus educators. And soon, they started expanding into other exams as well. By 2019, they offered SSC, GATE, CAT, JEE and NEET courses as well. So between 2015 and 2019, its valuation soared from just $4 million to $465 million. But then something happened. a black swan event that no one expected, which would change the edtech sector in India forever. The world was hit by a pandemic and suddenly the entire country shut down. And thus began a golden period for online education platforms. Any and every type of teaching went online, and edtech companies experienced growth at an unbelievable pace. VCs were spending money on edtech startups like there was no tomorrow, and Byju and Unacademy became the poster children of edtech in India. Both of them became unicorns by 2020. While Byju's was on an entirely different level, Unacademy was a close second with a $3.4 billion valuation by 2021. And by 2022, Unacademy had spent almost $100 million on acquisitions alone. Mastery, a K-12 education platform, Spay Labs, now called Graphy, an online platform for creators to make courses, and TapChief, a platform connecting freelancers with businesses for gigs. Now, the edtech players did not know it back then, but that was their peak and a devastating storm was coming. After their last funding round in 2021, Unacademy was strangely unable to raise funds. But at the same time, their losses started ballooning. From a loss of Rs 300 crores in FY 2020 to Rs 1500 crores in FY 2021 and 2848 crores in FY 2022. This was coupled with layoffs that I already told you about earlier. Layoffs that started after 2022 and saw its workforce shrink by almost 60%. So as Unacademy was gasping for air, Gaurav Munjal went against his core belief of being an online platform and started opening offline coaching centers across popular Indian cities. This resulted in additional costs for opening these centers and hiring educators, leading to even higher expenses. But even that move did not pay off. If anything, they now faced even tougher competition from well-established offline players like Allen and Bansal classes. Gaurav Munjal told Forbes that the same investors who were chasing him to take their money in 2021 were suddenly not interested and went cold within a year. But what exactly went wrong here? How did Unacademy lose track in just 1 year? Well, the crisis was actually in the making much before the funding winter set in 2022. You see, when the country locked down in 2020, the demand for online education was very high, and all the startups were flush with VC money. As many as 7 edtech startups had attained unicorn status by 2022. Now, when these edtech platforms started, the competition was low, so the cost of acquiring customers was also low. By spending Rs 10,000 on Facebook or Google Ads online, platforms like Byju and Unacademy could get customers to pay upwards of Rs 50,000 for their courses. Unlike offline centers, there were no setup costs involved and scaling was very easy. The same recorded lesson could be shown to 100 students or 100,000 students, and the educator would still charge the same. Whereas in offline centers, an educator can only teach 50 to 100 students at a time. But as the pandemic went away and offline learning opened up, two things happened. The first was that contrary to the expectations of all these edtech companies, students still preferred offline coaching over online learning and went back to the classrooms. And secondly, multiple players came in with VC money loaded pockets, while the pool of students they were competing for actually started shrinking. So the customer pool became smaller, the bidders on that pool became higher, and the revenue came down since everyone started offering discounts. As a result, where edtech companies like Unacademy earlier had margins of 40 to 60% during the pandemic, the profit margins took a massive hit. Customer acquisition costs increased by almost 2 to 3 times. And then there was a problem that was unique to the edtech sector. See, for platforms like Zomato or Blinkit or Paytm, the lifetime value of a customer is very high. Once Zomato acquires a customer, he will likely keep placing orders with Zomato for years to come. So it is okay for Zomato to spend investors' money to acquire customers even at a loss. But for edtech companies like Unacademy, it doesn't work like that. If they pay Rs 10,000 to get a customer, he will buy a 1 year or 2 year course, and then after that, he is gone forever. So the unit economics of customer acquisition for edtech companies like Unacademy was much more difficult to crack. And then it was as if a domino of troubles was started. See, good times make weak men. And all these edtech companies, including Unacademy, were used to being flush with VC money and spent heavily without any frugality. Unacademy, for example, offered free meals to its employees and business class travel for management. As a result, in FY 2022, employee costs accounted for 48% of the total expenditure of Unacademy. And this did not even include the money they were paying to educators on their platforms. So the reason for all the layoffs was clear. If Unacademy were to survive, they could not afford to bleed money on employee perks and benefits. And then, when it was clear to Gaurav Munjal that online education alone could not be a viable business model, he changed his strategy. Despite being vehemently against the idea of Unacademy going offline, Munjal heard what the market was telling him and decided to expand. So in 2022, Unacademy decided to launch 15 offline centers across 9 cities in India, with goals to have 1 lakh students within a year. But Munjal found out the hard way that offline was a different beast to tackle altogether, because the offline and online coaching businesses are fundamentally different. Setting up offline coaching centers is capital intensive. You need to rent out space, set up infrastructure, and then hire the best teachers with sky-high salaries, because the students go where the best teachers go. And then even after that, scaling is difficult. You can only fit a limited number of students in a classroom. And another problem was that in the offline business, results matter the most. Munjal had to fight the likes of Alan and Akash, decade-old players who had given consistent results. The fixed costs are huge, and internal sources claim that it takes a time of at least 3 years for an offline center to become profitable. And time is what Gaurav Munjal does not have right now. Investors are forcing him to act soon or move on. You see, there is a fundamental difference between Byju and Unacademy. Byju Ravindran was essentially throwing away money on acquisitions and marketing at one point, and the company eventually drowned in debt. But that is not the case with Gaurav Munjal. He is a smart guy who knows that the last man standing will succeed. In his own words, failure is irrelevant until it is fatal. Unacademy does not have any debt right now. And while the layoffs may not have helped their reputation, he has otherwise scaled the business ethically. Unlike Byju's, you will find little to no reports that accuse Unacademy of predatory practices, toxic targets and work culture, or lack of transparency in financial reporting. In fact, Gaurav Munjal recently said that he has 1600 crores sitting in the bank. With zero debt, he has enough money to last for the next 5 years, even with no new funding. But then why are investors forcing this merger or acquisition on him? Well, as I said, it is because of time. Investors don't care about the survival of a company. They want growth. Unacademy has raised $800 million from investors so far. With the types of risk investors take with these startups, they want a high ROI. They want the revenue, numbers, and profits to grow so that they can get a handsome exit, take that money, and reinvest it in another early stage startup. Gaurav Munjal has lowered costs significantly in the recent years. Other than the layoffs, frugality has been implemented throughout the company. He decreased his annual cash burn rate from 1400 crores in 2022 to 570 crore last year, and this year it will be 350 crores. Unacademy was also able to decrease its losses by nearly 40% while still increasing its revenue by 26% last year. And Gaurav Munjal has been claiming for some time now that the company will be profitable soon. So Edtech is in a phase of consolidation right now. Some companies will merge, others will shut down, and eventually we'll likely have 2 to 3 who will come out victorious and win the game. Companies just need to work on a business model that is sustainable and profitable, which is what Gaurav Munjal is working on right now. But he is a hyper-ambitious founder who knows how to go through tough times. Along with Roman Sani, he turned Unacademy into a unicorn before they turned 30. And while Edtech companies are going bust left, right and center, they sit comfortably with no debt and a lot of runway in the bank. He still aims to turn Unacademy into a $100 billion business. But for that, the company will have to enter several markets and create multiple new products, while also tackling investor pressure. I put in 8 days of research in this video, so please support my work by subscribing. Follow me on LinkedIn and Instagram. The link is in the description below. Until I see you in the next video, goodbye.